1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higher Side Chats.
Hallelujah, Higher Side Chatters. How the hell are you? Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke, and getting ready for another weird ride from sunny San Diego. I'm Greg Carlwood, and as we all know, there are many questions left unanswered when it comes to human history and that of our solar system, and whether the shadowy elite of today know much more than we do is debatable, but either way, I doubt they're sharing. So we're on our own to piece this thing together, and on that journey, it's always a good idea to use as many tools as we can to see if we can't get some answers to some of these huge mysteries. And today we're going to examine what can be gleaned from the deepest and most exotic application of remote viewing with my guest Courtney Brown. Courtney is the director of the Farsight Institute, a nonprofit made up of highly skilled remote viewers applying their skills to such mysteries as the destruction of Atlantis, the Cydonia region of Mars, the pyramids of Giza, major events in the solar system, multiple universes, the truth about the events of 9/11, and most recently, the true nature of a large anomalous structure on one of Saturn's moons. I love what they're doing at the Farsight Institute, so let's take this ride. Courtney, my man, welcome to THC.
Greg, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, this is very cool. I only recently found out about you guys from a few listener requests, but I think this is such a great idea and a genius application of remote viewing. Of course, we know the military's been heavily involved in remote viewing. I've even heard some pretty credible stories of crimes being solved with remote viewing data, but I'm sure there's still some skeptics out there, and since everything we're talking about today hinges on the validity of remote viewing, I think we got to start there. What would you say to people who might be skeptical or unsure if they can trust this type of data to begin with?
Well, first of all, I used to live in Missouri, the show me state.
Me too.
So it's perfectly okay to be skeptical. The big thing about being a skeptic is that you're open-minded. Now, most people who call themselves skeptics are not open-minded. For example, there's a group called PsyCops, a Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. And in my personal opinion, they call themselves skeptic. They have a skeptic magazine and so on. But in my personal opinion, they're as dogmatic as the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And I'm not criticizing the Catholic Church. I mean, I used to be the cantor in the Basilica for years down here in Atlanta. But the issue is, I mean, they are firm believers. They're just firm believers in the opposite side of people who think that there's paranormal or religious beliefs or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they're firm believers, these so-called skeptics. So, but that's not the real definition of a skeptic. The real definition of a skeptic is someone who just doesn't take anything at blind faith and likes to see the data and actually evaluate it. Now, people who generally call themselves skeptics are, in my view, they generally are really better classified as professional debunkers, meaning they have an agenda, just the same as a fanatical religious person has an agenda. They have an agenda to convert as many people and get as many people sold on their bag of stuff. Well, a lot of people who are so-called skeptics, they have an agenda. So they're misusing the term. But the proper use of the word skeptic is the way I like to use it, which is its proper definition, which is an open mind and don't take anything at blind faith and ask to see how it was done, how the remote viewing was done, how the data of anything are actually collected. Mm-hmm. So what we do at the Farsight Institute is we keep all of our projects open, meaning we do a lot of projects that are totally public. All of our projects are public, but we have a lot of projects that are public from the very beginning. Some of our science projects actually have public verification of the data collection process. For example, in our so-called multiple universes project, which was an explicit test on the existence of multiple or parallel timelines, multiple universes, sort of Star Trek type of thing. Well, we designed an experiment in which the remote viewing was done first. It was way beyond double blind because the targets did not even exist at the time that the sessions were being done. meaning the sessions were done, and that all of the sessions were encrypted. They were paper and pen sessions in those days. They were encrypted, and they were put on the website for the Farsight Institute and allowed to be downloaded by literally tens of thousands of people around the world. And then 2 months later, someone, a designated person, would pick a target, and that person would pick a target, and that would be some event or place that the remote viewers were supposed to describe. And that target was supposed to have occurred, that event was supposed to have occurred after the remote viewers did their sessions, but before the person who was picking the target, that person called the tasker, actually did it. So if we had the sessions done in January, some event would happen in February. It could be anything in the world, as long as there was public verification of it, like a major news story or something. And then in March, the tasker would look over everything that happened in the world and just pick one. And then we would take that and we would post it on our website, post the passwords to decrypt the sessions, and people could see that the sessions that were done in January were a perfect, not like vague, foggy, fuzzy, but a perfect match for the actual target that happened in the future of when the remote viewing was done. And so we actually had to have public participation in the data verification process with that experiment. Now, that experiment was published in a leading journal and a peer-reviewed journal. And it's available on our website, and our website is www.farsight, Farsight, like seeing far.org, O-R-G. And there's if you go scroll down, you'll see a link down sort of towards 2/3 of the way down saying latest peer-reviewed published research. And if you click on that, you can actually read the article about on which that experiment was based. And so, all of our projects we put up, 95% of everything that we have on our website, including a course in remote viewing that's over 20 hours, hosted by YouTube, free text and everything, is free. Almost everything that we have on the website is totally free. There are just a few projects that were recent projects that we actually sell DVDs or video on demand things for. And there's actually only 4 of those projects. The Atlantis project, which you already mentioned, is actually available for free on YouTube. You can get to it from our website. And the 4 projects that we do actually sell as DVDs or video on demand, they required a formal presentation that was like a couple hours long. The 9/11 project required 2 formal presentations, meaning two videos that are about 2 hours long to cover all of that stuff. And those types of things are not really a YouTube type of thing. So so we do those through Vimeo, which are video on demand, and we also has a DVD for people who want that format. So, and those projects are really our most modern projects. And one of the things that has changed is, and this addresses the issue of people being skeptical but having an open mind. That's different from people saying they're skeptical but having a very closed mind. So if they are skeptical and have an open mind, it's very good to watch some of the videos for our most recent projects. Our most recent one is Aliens on Iapetus, and we had one on Cydonia Mars, the so-called face on Mars. We had one on the 9/11 events and how the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed. And the reason it's good to do that is the videos themselves were done live, meaning the remote viewing was done in those particular projects by Dick Algier, who's out in Hawaii, and Daz Smith, who's out in Britain. And those interviews, those remote viewing sessions were recorded live on video. And all the work that we do at the Institute is solo. So they were alone in the room. The remote viewers, we had to train them to set up their own camera equipment, their own audio guy. They had to get everything right. And the video quality is spectacular. We've got good cameras on both of them. So, what used to be sort of a boring enterprise of watching people draw on paper and pen and then comparing those drawings to the so-called target or thing they were supposed to be describing, even if it was done under totally blind conditions, which all of our work is done under totally blind conditions, it was boring to watch. But now that we do everything live on video, I have never heard anybody say anything other than it is spine-tingling, because you as the audience know what the target is because the project's been released. But you're clearly watching somebody who has no idea what the target is and is trying to describe it live, standing up in front of a whiteboard in a theatrically interesting manner. Now, this type of presentation was actually pioneered by Dick Elgar, who was a celebrity newscaster in Hawaii. He was the face of the news for 30 years in Hawaii. And he was more comfortable in front of a camera than behind a camera. So it was normal for him to say, hey, look, why do this on paper and pen? Let's just do it in front of a video camera. Right. So he was the one who really pioneered the way we do it. And now Daz does it. And when we train somebody new, my son is learning how to do all this as well. We trained the video component right from the get-go, right from the beginning, because it is the way to do remote viewing, standing up live on whiteboard, recorded live on video. Mm-hmm. And it is absolutely fascinating when you see these descriptions. These aren't like vague, fuzzy perceptions of like a line here or a squiggle there. These are absolutely spot-on, exact descriptions of exactly what the target is. And it's clear that the remote viewers you can see it with your own eyes. They don't know what the target is, but they're describing it. And it's exact. I mean, it is at least as good as if they were there and saw everything with their physical eyes. The reason I say at least, meaning it's actually better, is because they can move in time. If there's a wall, they can move through the wall. If they see an aircraft, they can move into the aircraft, into the cockpit. So it's actually better. But the clarity that they describe things with would not be any better if they were there physically with their own eyes and watching it. So they're that good. Now many people can say, well, how can this be? I mean, I don't do this. How can you do this? Well, it's difficult to do this. That's why there's only a few really good remote viewers, and they trained to do this, and it took a long time to train to be able to do this at that level. It's very much like playing the piano. So a skeptic can say, yeah, but I've never seen it. And I say, yeah, great. So you've never seen it. Have you ever gone to a concert and watched Lang Lang play the piano? If you've never seen Lang Lang or heard Lang Lang play the piano, you'd think it couldn't happen like that. So the point is that this type of remote viewing is rare because the normal waking state of consciousness for humans does not have this experience like this.
Right.
It's a specially trained experience. Normally, to give you a basic idea of why it's so unusual, is that our brains, our human brains, structured, via the code of DNA, are actually very sophisticated hologram generators. And what that means is they generate images, pictures, things that we see as 3D reality out of energy, out of frequencies. You see, no physicist has ever discovered anything solid ever in the history of anything. They say, well, my planet is real, my desk is real, my car is real, my body's solid. And I'd say, no, it's not. All that is empty space and molecules. And inside the molecules is empty space and atoms. And inside the atoms, empty space and protons, neutrons, and electrons. And inside those and down the rabbit hole it goes. No physicist has ever found a solid billiard ball type of anything. No particles. In fact, the physicists that are still looking for solid billiard ball type particles are called particleists, and they are almost an extinct species. They just are going away. So the only thing that a physicist has ever found anywhere in the universe is energy, frequency, waves. Now, physics is still quite confused about that. They're seduced by the very seductive reality of physical world as it appears to us. But the reality is they have never actually found anything solid. They've only found energy and waves. And that means that our whole universe is a frequency-based universe. And this gives you an idea of why remote viewing is possible. Because the brains are essentially extremely sophisticated hologram generators that screen out all frequencies except the ones it wants you to see. Mm-hmm. So it's just like a radio on a radio dial. There's a lot of broadcast stations broadcasting, but you only hear the one station you want to listen to. Television, the same thing. You turn on your TV, all the other frequencies are being screened out. All the other pictures, all the other shows on the other channels. You're only seeing the one channel. So that's exactly what it's like with our brains. There are a zillion things going on out there, and the brain screens out everything except one. And it is seductive. It is so real. And you can say, yeah, but how can it be that real? Well, look at a flat panel TV. That looks pretty good. And in 10 years, they're going to have hologram projection televisions, and you'll see Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Princess Leia standing in your living room, and it'll look as real as you and I standing in our living rooms. So, it's just a matter of understanding how pictures and images, as real as they look, can be assembled out of frequencies. So what remote viewing actually is remote viewers train to gradually allow to have their brain sort of let in some of the other frequencies. You actually have to work with the brain to actually get it to allow in some of the frequencies that it normally screens out. And then the remote viewers, they do is they learn to focus on those images. Those images are not as strong as a broadcast signal. It's sort of like you're watching a TV and you're watching your favorite show. But then you see like a ghost-like image on top of the show. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Yeah. And so what if you stopped concentrating on your favorite show and just started concentrating on the ghost-like image? You'd eventually see a person, they're walking down the street, they're entering a building. What's all that going on? That's what remote viewing is like. So you're focusing on something that's normally screened out, and you're training the mind to allow that in without being interrupted. And so that's why skeptics sort of have a field day laughing and saying, this is ridiculous, I don't see a multiple reality. Well, they're just seduced by the convincing, seductive nature of the hologram that's being generated in front of them by their own brains. But it's really stupid because they're not connecting the dots, which is nothing solid has ever been discovered ever. So now physicists have a problem with this too. They still talk about mass. They recognize that mass equals, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. The speed of light squared is simply a constant, so mass and energy are equal. E equals mc squared. So they recognize that energy and mass are equivalent. They just don't get it. They don't wrap their head around how this reality can't exist. For example, one famous incident with a physicist and his graduate students, the graduate students were putting all this together and saying, well, that means that this can't be real, this reality. And the physicist, the senior physicist, went and stubbed his toe. And he looked at his graduate students and yelled at them, we know it's real because that hurts. But, what kind of science is that? Anyway.
It's a tricky illusion, definitely.
It's a very tricky illusion, and it's very seductive. But we do know now why the remote viewing works. Actually, the physics for why the remote viewing works is fundamentally tied to a revolution in the way quantum mechanics is interpreted. And that was tied back to Hugh Everett in 1957, who did his dissertation in physics under John Wheeler at Princeton. And Hugh Everett was widely laughed at the time by the leading scholars in physics. He was so disturbed by the whole thing, he left physics and went into the Defense Department, and he was one of the engineers for the nuclear policies of the U.S. government and the world, actually, the so-called MAD, which was mutually assured destruction theory. But that was actually pretty useful because there were people in civilian life, leaders, as well as the military, who were actually in those days arguing for a first strike against the Soviet Union and China. And it was Hugh Everett that convinced them that that was insanity, that you can't blow up half the planet and expect to live yourself.
Right.
And so imagine if they had actually succeeded. This is the sort of Dr. Strangelove sort of thinking back in those days, but it actually was being thought about by what we would consider normal, reasonable people in the sense that they had, general status and they were civilian leaders and so on. And Hugh Everett was the one who said, look, we can do something different. Let both sides or all sides have their nuclear weapons, point them at each other, and we'll call that MAD, which is crazy, but it's MAD. It's mutually assured destruction. And that way nobody will launch anything. And that was what saved us from annihilation. So anyway, that's what Hugh Everett did. But it turns out that that type of thinking, which is called the other worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that everything is frequency-based and that there are other parallel universes, that type of thinking is now starting to enter mainstream physics. It took a while. But approximately, I understand now, approximately 18% of all mainstream physicists have thrown out the earlier interpretations of quantum mechanics and relativistic physics and have adopted the other worlds interpretation. Now, that still means that 82%, which is a large majority, still cling to the old ideas, which are over 100 years old. The fundamentals of quantum mechanics and relativistic physics have not changed for over 100 years. So they're screwed up. Nothing in science changes. I mean, the details are better. We have now merged the Copenhagen interpretation with relativity, so we have the standard model. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of refinement mathematically, but the fundamentals haven't changed for over 100 years. So the multiple worlds or other worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics really does change everything. And now about 18% of mainstream physicists have adopted that. And we're essentially waiting for the older physicists to retire and die off.
Right.
And then there'll be generational replacement. And that's how Max Planck noted long ago that's how real change happens in science. You have to wait till the old farts die off. And then the new people who were introduced to these ideas from the beginning, they adopt them. And that's why there's a lag.
Yeah. Well, it's good that they're kind of catching up to you a little bit. I think that's a pretty good introduction to remote viewing and the changing view of mainstream physics. And maybe we can get into a couple of the projects you've done. Maybe let's start with the latest one, because this is pretty damn interesting. It's called Aliens on Iapetus, which is a moon of Saturn. Tell us about this and why, out of all the strange things in our solar system, this one became a priority for you guys.
Well, when we do projects at the Farsight Institute, we always absolutely insist that a huge chunk of the project be totally verifiable. So we can't do a project if it's just somebody's idea and there's nothing verifiable. There's nothing that you can actually see. Even if it's true, you can't use remote viewing to prove something in the absence of something that's physical that you can compare with. So remote viewing data doesn't stand by itself alone. There has to be some evidence. So what we were looking for in this particular set of projects, this is actually part 2 of a 3-part project. The first one dealt with remote viewing the face on Mars in the Cydonia region. The second one is Aliens on Iapetus, and the third one is coming out in mid-July, and that one is on the famous incident of the Phoenix Lights. And so what we needed was something verifiable. And so with Cydonia Mars, we have really good imagery coming from space probes that are orbiting Mars and sent there by NASA, and they have pictures. So when the remote viewers remote view that spot on Mars, we know a lot of what's physically there because we're looking at the picture. And the remote viewers have to describe that exactly. But while they're there, they also, see other stuff. Like they see that facility, that spot, it's called the face on Mars, and then they go into it. Stuff that you can't see in the picture, but they give us the entire backstory on it. They go back in time. But a verifiable component is what the physical thing looks like right now with the barren environment and so on. That has to be exactly correct in order for us to trust the rest of the data, or to be persuaded that the rest of the data are plausible. So with aliens on Iapetus, that was a situation in which we had a picture that was supplied by NASA using the Cassini space probe that, by the way, is still orbiting Saturn to this day, still taking pictures of Saturn and its moons and so on. And that space probe took a picture of a crater in which there was something on the side of that crater, on the wall of the crater, that definitely did not look like the wall of a crater. It looked like some buildings with windows on them and what looked like a huge staircase that actually had a very artificial right angle bend to it. So it was very anomalous in terms of the picture. And I said to myself long ago, I had seen some internet chatter on it many years ago. And I looked at the picture and I said, whoa, that's weird. And so I just filed it in the back of my mind. And the reason that I wanted to keep that as a possible target or project is because we had a picture. And so, for example, believe it or not, the famous Roswell incident in New Mexico, the so-called crashed ship. As many people think that that's really important, that's actually a project that we can't do very easily because we don't have anything verifiable. I mean, there were some witnesses, but they were heavily coerced by governmental authorities to keep quiet. You're really dealing with just hearsay, what people said. And we don't have any pictures. We don't have anything that we can compare with the remote viewing data.
Is a location and a time not enough?
No, because all you'd get was a desert environment. And really what you'd really want, all you'd get is, Roswell is essentially flat. So what you'd get is flat land. Mm-hmm. And, that's just not enough to go on. They just have flat land. Now on Iapetus, it's not flat land. It's a meteor crater on a dry, barren moon of Saturn. And there's no air. So you have all of that information. You have an off-world place. There's no air. It's a crater, so it's obviously an impact. It was producing a crater. And both remote viewers got it exactly. They said this is a crater caused by a meteor on an off-world place. And this thing that we're looking at is on the wall of the crater. I mean, that's a lot of physical stuff because we can see it in the picture. See, we don't have that for Roswell. Now, gotcha. I personally think that the Roswell event happened. So it's not that I don't think it happened. It's just that not every project, even if I think it's true, lends itself to being a good remote viewing project because we have to have something physical that we have unambiguous evidence from. Right. Now, a friend of mine said, well, why don't we do a session a project on some case where it was some reporter who had talked to some retired Japanese general and reported this. And so the interview took place and the general was real and the general was reporting about some facility. Well, the trouble with that is, okay, so you have an interview that did take place, you have a general that was real, and you had some reported facility or place. The trouble is that building, that facility, we don't have anything public that's sort of known about that. We could remote view a building there, but the general, a Japanese general, is not enough to go on. And one reporter interviewing that. So there's a level of verifiable believability that has to be there for us to pick a target. So in the NASA in the Iapetus project, We have the Cassini space probe. That's an official probe launched by the United States government, launched by NASA, sent there, and it sent back official photographs that are publicly available. Do you get it? I mean,
Yeah.
that's unambiguous. And we don't have to worry about the believability of a particular reporter or a particular general. It's coming directly from the government. Mm-hmm. So with Cydonia Mars, it's the same thing. Now, with the Phoenix Lights experiment, you can say, well, why is that? We don't have, the same type of thing. Well, we actually have a lot of YouTube videos of the Phoenix Lights. However, we can't use those videos as the basis for a video of a remote viewing project because we can never know for sure. I think that a lot of those videos are perfectly great.
Yeah.
They're exactly what they said they are, but we can't know that for sure. It could be somebody that just doctored it. And what if we did a whole remote viewing project on a particular video that we saw on YouTube that was done by a private person? Well, what if we invest the time and energy and come out with a DVD project, and then later on that person said, oh, I just concocted that on my computer using video software.
Right.
Where are we? The whole thing blows apart. So we can't rely on something that's what a person uploads on YouTube. However, there are many videos available on YouTube about that. So collectively, that's there. But the Phoenix Lights is different for a big reason. The Phoenix Lights were witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people for over an hour, and they flew in formation over 5 states before they settled in over Phoenix. And one of the witnesses was the governor of the state, Fief Symington, who looked up and saw the underbelly of the ship and said it was the biggest thing that he ever saw flying. It wasn't just like a flare that the government dropped. He saw the underbelly of the ship together with a few 100,000 other people. So that was an eyewitness report that was useful for us to do the project because it wasn't 1 or 2 people. It was a whole city that came out, and it stayed around long enough that everybody could see it. So it was a big deal. That's unlike Roswell. Roswell may have been seen by 10 or 20 people and then hushed up. But the Phoenix Lights is different. That's hundreds of thousands of people
Yeah.
and for a very long time period. So that we don't have an official government-released photograph, but we do have the governor of the state and hundreds of thousands of people having witnessed stuff. Plus, we have a slew of YouTube videos. Now, 1 or 2 of the YouTube videos may be fraudulent, but the general weight of it is all of those YouTube videos combined gives credibility to the idea that something very strange was there. So anyway, that's why we pick our projects. A lot of people don't understand why we pick our projects. So your question was actually a really good one. And that verifiable element is important. Like somebody wrote to me the other day and said, why don't we remote view the flat Earth? Now, I've been around this planet a lot. I fly to Africa a lot. I mean, it's a round Earth. But the whole idea is, can you remote view something that's just a crazy idea?
Right.
Meaning, and remote viewing can't be used by itself to prove something by itself. So you can't remote view something like an idea like the flat Earth. I mean, it's just crazy.
What about the middle of the planet? Like there are people, of course, the flat Earth is definitely way out on the fringes of strange ideas. But what about some people talk about there being a hollow cavity in the Earth? Is there any way you could remote view the center of the planet?
No, because we don't have anything verifiable. We don't have a picture. We don't have a government statement. Meaning, remote viewing isn't, even if the data you get back is accurate, it's not very good. And remote viewing something where you don't have some foothold of something that's totally verifiable coming from an unambiguous source. So if there is a big cavity in the center of the planet, that doesn't do us any good. Now, I know a lot of people talk about this so-called hollow Earth idea. It's crazy as far as I'm concerned because our planet is without any ambiguity, and this is verifiable with zillions of scientists all over the planet, is a giant ball of molten liquid rock. 8,000 miles in diameter. And it has an 8-mile thin crust on it. Now, from one perspective, that's very important to know, because if you were to pick a planet to live on, this would not be it. It's a very unstable planet where the atmosphere is thick, the weather is horrible, the gravity is very high, and it's a molten ball of liquid lava.
Yeah.
And we live on the surface of a balloon. Now, it's okay for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10,000 years, but eventually the sun is going to burp in our direction with a coronal mass ejection, and the jelly that's on the end of the Earth is going to quiver. And when that quivers, the crust is going to crinkle, and we will be brought back to hunter-gatherer stage. So this has been documented to have happened a number of times on a regular basis. And one of the authors of this theory that civilization has rose repeatedly and then been crushed basically because of solar phenomena is Robert Schoch, S-C-H-O-C-H, and he's a tenured professor at Boston University. And he wrote a book recently called Forgotten Civilizations, and he goes through the idea, the whole process of the evidence that civilization has in fact lived and been around a lot longer than 3,000 to 5,000 years, and that it basically gets crushed. It gets ground down to a pulp. And that's what kind of planet we live on. So when people start telling me about the hollow Earth idea, I'm saying, boy, if they only knew the reality. It's not only not hollow, it's a ball of jelly, and there's no way you're going to have a cavern in the middle of a ball of liquid rock, in the middle of lava. I mean, no one in their right mind would build a cavern in the middle of a ball of liquid molten lava. I mean,
sounds pretty risky.
It's crazy. And so now that doesn't mean that there aren't large underground facilities that can be a mile deep, 2 miles deep.
Yeah, wasn't there Pat Price was a remote viewer who, if I remember correctly, one of the things he thought he saw was 4 underground bases with cooperation between humans and an alien race. That's pretty interesting remote viewing right there.
It is, and I'm sure that type of stuff is there, but that's a whole lot different than a hollow Earth, which is like a balloon that's empty. We're only on the surface of it. And so that is actually very believable and very interesting that we could have caverns underneath, a mile deep or 2 miles deep. But you're still talking about activity within the solid crust. We're not talking about going into the core of the planet. In fact, we did one project called the so-called Atlantis project, which is available for free on YouTube, and you get to it from our website, farsight.org, where we describe the civilization that built 2 what are now underwater anomalies, which is a large city on the bottom of the ocean, 3 miles west of, 3 miles deep and 1,000 miles west of Portugal and Morocco. And that used to be a huge city, and it's under the water now. And there's another set of anomalies similarly underwater down near Antarctica. And we did remote viewing projects on that because we had very clear Google Earth imagery of those anomalies.
Right.
And what it turned out to be that 70,000 years ago, our civilization had a technological level that was a little more advanced than we are today, about 100 years more advanced than we are today. And they had a secret science project that they were doing at the time, and that was to bore through the crust of the planet to get to the heat below. Now, they thought they could control it, and it wasn't just like a crack in the crust that a little lava seeps through. This was huge, major boreholes, like the channel connecting Britain and Europe, or the Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel, in New York area. This is huge boreholes going right through the crust. And they thought they could control it, and they didn't. What happened is they popped the balloon, and there was a huge explosion you could have seen from Mars or Jupiter. You could have seen it on Earth from a long ways away. It was the biggest explosion you could imagine. And what happened is they popped the balloon, and when you get a balloon and you release a lot of pressure like that. That happened down near in the New Zealand area. And it happened, we do know for reasons I can get into if you want, it happened 70,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And what it did is it created a dent in the antipode. The antipode is the exact opposite spot on the planet. And what happens is when you release pressure on one side, the opposite side goes in, dent. And that antipode for the explosion area is exactly, not approximately, but exactly where the anomaly is under the ocean, 3 miles deep, 1,000 miles west of Portugal and Morocco. So that tells you that Europe, 70,000 years ago, used to extend at least 1,000 miles west of where it is now. Now that explosion, mainstream science knows there was an explosion. They like to refer to it as the Toba catastrophe theory, which references Toba, Lake Toba in Indonesia, where they think the big blowout happened. They're in the general right area. If you look at the globe, Lake Toba in Indonesia is actually in the general area, but they didn't get it exactly. The exact area that it blew out was a little bit closer to New Zealand, which is not far away from Lake Toba, and it's New Zealand, and that spot has the largest concentration of lava rock on the planet and also the thinnest crust on the planet. That's where the blowout actually occurred. And it was being controlled, the project was being controlled by the facility in Antarctica that is now under the water. But actually much of it is under the water. Some of it is still on land. And by the way, this also tells you why the government is so keen on sending research bases to Antarctica, under very extreme weather and harsh conditions. They're not in the slightest bit interested in digging up mastodon bones. They want the tech. They know that there's tech under the ice, and that's the whole purpose for all of these exploratory digs going on in Antarctica. The tech. There's lots of tech there.
Oh yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what goes on there. And for people who are doubting, well, I don't know how much to emphasize this, but the government's main modus operandi, its main way of working is through secrecy.
Right, of course.
The government has never spilled the beans on all types of stuff. They keep things secret, and maybe if some person feels good about releasing stuff, they'll release it 50, 60 years after the fact. But secrecy is what it does. The military does secrecy. The government does secrecy. So if you're saying, no, how could all this be? You've just been seduced by an organization whose job is to keep secrets. And so you don't look at the organization to get you out of the hole that you dug yourself. Look in the mirror. Yeah, look in the mirror.
Well said. Yeah, I don't think anyone would argue with you on that. So let's talk a little bit about the details of this Iapetus structure. I mean, when they looked at it, I love that documentary. And when they looked at it in modern times, of course, they see ruins, which don't really surprise anyone. But when they went back into the past, they found some really interesting things about this strange structure at the top of this crater on one of Saturn's moons. Can you tell us some of the details about what they saw that it used to be?
Yeah, this is actually one of the most interesting projects that I've ever seen done with remote viewing, because when you think of an alien facility, you normally think of a military base, you think of a spy base, you think of a mining operation, you think of an industrial operation. This was none of that. This was, well, let's put it in human terms. We have people like Richard Branson, who runs Virgin Airlines. We have people like Bill Gates. We have people like Warren Buffett. Those are rich people. And rich people do a lot of funny things with their money. For example, Marlon Brando took some of his money and bought himself an island. He wanted an island. So, okay, he got an island. So they do funny things with their money. And there was somebody in our solar system in the ancient past, we're talking really ancient past, who was far richer than Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. And he also had the technical ability to fly to places like Iapetus. So let's say he came from Mars, for example. He had the ability to get there obviously quickly, like in an hour or two. So they weren't using chemical rockets. They were using the propulsion systems that were common to, or the whatever those systems are called, that are common to, say, UFOs that we see. So what he did was he built, the only way you can really describe it is like it is the most luxurious vacation spot hotel resort hotel type thing that you can imagine. It is a combination hotel resort, health spa, communal retreat, all wrapped into one. And what basically happened there is that the wealthiest of the wealthy, the elite of the elite, would go there for purposes of personal growth. And if you think about it, that location on the wall of the crater in Iapetus is arguably on the most beautiful location on the planet Earth, on the solar system. Mm-hmm. It's on the moon of Iapetus with all of the stark, harsh surrounding terrain. It's got no atmosphere, so you're talking about a completely unfettered star field. And right above you, you have the rings of Saturn and Saturn itself. I mean, can you imagine a more beautiful spot? If you do Google pictures of Saturn and its rings, you see a lot of pictures of Saturn, and it is a beautiful planet to look at through these pictures that you see. And imagine if you're right underneath the rings on a moon of Saturn, on Iapetus, looking up. It was absolutely the most beautiful scene on the planet, on the whole solar system. And in terms of talking about sort of feeling a communal concept of close to God, close to whatever, the universal source of life or whatever, I can't imagine a situation that would be more inspiring to people. Well, this guy built this facility to capture all of that, and everything had to be brought in. Nothing can be grown on Iapetus, of course. So everything, water, air, food, everything had to be brought in. They had a help staff, like a hotel staff, but the people that were actually there enjoying the facility, they were the richest of the richest, elitist of the elite, and then this was going along fine. And then we have a lot of indications from other projects as well that there was a war in the solar system. Something happened that really disrupted everything. And this war ended it for that facility on Iapetus. And the people that were on Iapetus couldn't get off. There was either they didn't have the ships because the ships had already taken other people and no new ships came because of the war, or they had the ships but had nowhere to go with the ships, meaning the war had devastated everything. Now, we know from some of our other research that there is strong evidence of a war. For example, the asteroid belt, we did a full project on the origins of the asteroid belt, and you can see that on our website too, under the link in the nav bar called Exploding Planet. We investigated the dual theories that the origin of the asteroid belt was because of a planet that was once there that exploded, or it was what mainstream science says, the refuse or the junk that was left over from the primordial solar nebula. Well, there's not a shred of evidence that supports the solar nebula idea, but Thomas Van Flandern, a very mainstream scientist who was head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory, he had amassed a huge amount of planetary data that clearly indicated that the asteroid belt came from a planet that exploded for whatever reasons. Now, there's a couple of big things that are obvious. I won't go through all the data that Thomas Van Flandern discussed, although I do mention some of that in the video presentation that's available on the web for the exploding planet. But the basic sort of big thumbs that stick in your eye are the asteroids are big rocks, like Ceres asteroid. They're huge, huge rocks. You can't get large, solid rocks like that out of the primordial solar nebula. The primordial solar nebula is dust, and dust gets attracted to a gravity source, and the gravity source then compresses the dust into big rocks. So you can't have rocks by themselves coming out of the primordial solar nebula. They have to have a gravity source to compress them first, and then you can get a rock. And so these big asteroids can't come from dust. Dust doesn't form into rocks yet without the gravity source. Secondly, the surface of the asteroids show very obvious evidence that they've been exposed to extreme glazing heat, a strong heat source. And so, because of melting glazing on the surface. So that's another indication that whatever happened involved a strong energy event. And so what basically happened from other projects, and many of the projects, even the Cydonia project, they all sort of touch on this event in our solar system that included this major war. And Iapetus apparently touches on that as well, that there was some war, and that did it for Iapetus. So the people that were on that facility, they died there. They ran out of food, they ran out of water, they ran out of air, and I'm assuming that if we went there today, the remote viewing data does suggest that some of the power generators that they have are still operating, but in power down mode. They're at very low rates. And so we would actually go into the facility and we'd probably find the dead bodies of the people who died there, the bodies of the people who died there, or maybe the dust of their bodies. But they're still there. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming, unless somebody went in and cleaned it up. But why would you clean up something like that? It's the facilities, typically things like that are just left and abandoned. Yeah. So it's a very interesting historical thing because it doesn't fit into any of the normal categories of military base, spy base, industrial facility, or mining operation. It's something completely new, completely different. A rich person's whimsical idea of a place to commune, and he built this thing. And you could only do such a thing if you had really what we would consider unlimited wealth. But we just have to assume that in the distant past, there were some people like that. We have our Bill Gates. We have our Warren Buffetts. So, if you're given enough money, they start thinking about, well, what am I going to do with this stuff?
Right. It makes sense. And one of the viewers, the way he put it that I really liked is kind of like it was he was seeing an extravagant building in a wasteland, similar to like a space Vegas, because Las Vegas, of course, is super extravagant, way out there in the middle of the desert. And this was kind of like a similar type thing, a really extravagant structure made out in basically the space desert of Iapetus. And I found that really fascinating and a good way to put it. But on the subject of the rings, being able to see them from the surface, that's really interesting. And one thing they both noted that I liked was the structure, kind of like the St. Louis Arch, but leaning real severely, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Yeah. And I thought that was interesting because, at least here, many of the ancient sites are built to form certain alignments, and being that close to the rings of Saturn and having that shape, I wondered if it wasn't built to kind of capture some type of ceremonial alignment in the ancient past.
Actually, Greg, you're raising some really great ideas. The idea of that sort of like the St. Louis Arch tipped on its side. The thing that's so interesting about that is when you look up, that's exactly what you see with the rings of Saturn. Mm. You'll see an arch tipped on its side right overhead. And this arch that they had that was sort of tipped on its side, it sort of makes sense given the ring structure of Saturn. So it's a really great idea that you raised. Also, the example that you raised of Las Vegas, I mean, that was a brilliant example. That's exactly it. As a luxury right off the scale in the middle of a desert. Those contrasts are what make something so interesting. Those huge, unbelievable contrasts. But yeah, that arch type thing that was so clearly described on its side. In fact, for the first time, you've actually explained why that arch thing would be on its side.
Wow.
It would parallel the ring structure, which is right above.
Yeah. I thought that was so awesome because he doesn't really know what he's looking at, and then he sees this thing, and it fit pretty well.
Yeah, and when they describe this thing and draw pictures of it, I even have to pinch myself. I've been doing this for a long time, but even when I see these data come in on our projects, I had to pinch myself because here they are, both remote viewers, Daz Smith and Dick Allgaier. They're both saying, this is a meteor crater. What's this doing here? And then they describe the terrain exactly. Harsh, barren terrain with no vegetation. I mean, it's exactly. I mean, and they're doing it totally blind. They have no idea where I sent them. And then they say, and what's this thing on the wall of the crater? I mean, how in the heck were they supposed to know it was on the wall of the crater? So, I mean, this is, for those people who are open-minded, but like to be shown the evidence, such as the people from the good state of Missouri, the show me state, that's what true skepticism is, meaning watch it with your own eyes and say, how the heck did they know that thing was on the wall of the crater? I see it in the photograph, but they didn't know that. And so that's really, really off the scale in terms of interesting. And when they draw the picture of it and where it is on the edge of the crater, it's not like an approximate sort of, but you have to sort of forgive them for getting it 50% right or anything. It's nothing like that. They got the whole thing exactly right, just the way it's there. And so when they start coming in with the new data, which is not in the picture, for example, when they go back in time, that becomes believable, at least very persuasive, because the stuff they got for what it looks like now is so spot on accurate with respect to what you see in the picture. By the way, I should mention, Greg, that we've just covered now a major reason why for Farsight projects we have to have that verifiable element, because it's that accuracy for the verifiable stuff that everything else depends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we are getting kind of close to the end here. You've done so many high-profile targets already. I'm kind of curious, outside of or beyond the Phoenix Lights, is there anything else on your list for the future you guys are going to be taking a look at?
Well, in the old days, I would simply lie to you. But now I've been caught at it so many times, I just sort of tell people. It's obvious we can never tell our future projects. The only reason I can tell you the Phoenix Lights is coming because the remote viewing is already done.
Right.
Everything that we do has to be done under totally blind conditions. Totally. There can be no leaks. So if anyone ever asks me, are you going to do this or are you going to do that? I would always say, under no circumstances, never would we touch that. In fact, for years, I told the remote viewers and radio hosts that we would never touch 9/11. We knew the government didn't want us to do it. It's hands off. We're not going to touch it. And it was at a time when I thought everyone believed me that I said, now's the time, perfect time to do it. So, that's the only time I officially lie when someone asks us about a future target. Because as soon as you say that you might do a target, that target cannot be done.
Yeah, you don't want to influence the actual review.
You can't. I mean, it's garbage. The whole thing would be a public scandal, no less. I mean, everyone would be able to point to say, no, you talked about it on this radio show that you were going to do that project. So obviously the remote viewers knew that was coming, and that's why they got the data that was there.
Fair.
I mean, it would totally corrupt everything we do. So that's one question I have never been able to address truthfully. So the only thing I'm telling you now that's different from the past is I'm telling you I'm not going to answer the question rather than give you a story about
Right.
Normally what I would do is I'd wait for them to ask me, are you ever going to do this or are you ever going to do that? And then I would definitively say, no, under no circumstances would we ever do that.
Yeah.
But in fact, I may be planning on doing that. So
Yeah, you got to preserve that integrity, which I respect.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, wow, man, this has been really fascinating. We covered a lot of different projects you guys have done. Super awesome, and I'm glad to see this project happening. Would you like to remind the people one more time where they can get the full details on some of these things before we go?
Yeah, everything's on our website at farsight.org, www.farsight.org, because we're a nonprofit. And please, when you go there, please sign up for our free newsletter. Just put your email address in. That's the only way we have to connect with people. And we actually have a very active YouTube channel as well, which you'll hear more about on our free newsletter. So if you get the newsletter, you'll be connected to our YouTube channel as well. So YouTube's really helped us to boost up the professionality of our YouTube channel. So it's a really well organized and a ton of free information. We have lots of trailers for all of our projects, all of our major projects. And we designed those trailers to actually be windows that are behind the scenes. So they're not promotional stuff. It's actually windows behind the scenes so they give you all types of extra information about the stuff going on that's not in the documentary. So it's fascinating just to go through all the so-called trailers, but they're really behind the scene type things.
Awesome. Well, man, thanks again, Courtney. This has been great. And I wish you guys the best of luck out there. Keep doing what you do and take care of yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for the interview, and I appreciate very much.
Rock me like a hurricane, people. There we have it. Definitely an interesting idea. I do wish we could have gotten into a little more detail about the results of these projects, but it was a good time. And if you woke up today not knowing about the Farsight Institute, I think it's at least something to make you wonder. I really do think remote viewing is a legitimate practice, but it is tough for a layman to understand what the limitations of such a tool might be. I've seen enough to place my bet on there being some type of ruins on the moon and Mars and, I guess now, Iapetus. And even if they are there, all we can really do is guess as to why. And at least now we have a group who's trying to dig deeper in a more substantial way. We did talk a little bit about the Atlantis project and the Mars project in the first hour, but in the Plus show we got more into the Sidonia study and the face on Mars, as well as the Pyramids of Giza project and the 9/11 sessions. All great applications of remote viewing, if you ask me. Maybe the Atlanteans did usher in their own demise. Maybe some ancient extraterrestrial tycoon did build an intergalactic space spa retreat center on a desert moon of Saturn. Either way, I'm glad the Farsight Institute is out there keeping things interesting. And I guess that's another one in the bag. As always, thanks for listening. I'll see you soon with something new. And as for adding a few more pieces of the big mysterious puzzle of life, the universe, and everything, I think I did my part today. Your move, builders of the elaborate space Vegas of Iapetus. Your frickin' move.
Sweet dreams to the elite. We're calling them out on THC. Uncovering secrets and conspiracies. Everybody's looking for something. Some of them want to use you. Some of them want to get used by you. Some of them want to abuse you. Some of them want to be abused.